Welcome to ARCS Supernova 2024. Tonight's two roundtable discussions feature our outstanding scholars in interactive conversations with distinguished moderators. While these scholars are not necessarily experts in these roundtable subjects, they come from a variety of scientific fields, and each one has conducted thoughtful research on these topics in preparation for tonight. Following the discussion, there may be time for questions and answers. After the roundtable, please visit the scholars' posters, which are distributed around the City Club. These posters are a fascinating sketch of each scholar's field of study. Now, thank you for joining us at the ARCS Roundtable on Artificial Intelligence, using AI in scientific research. Please welcome our moderators. Dr. Simone Bianco, Director of Computational Biology, Altos Labs, Bay Area Institute of Science. Dr. Tony Capra, Associate Professor, UC San Francisco School of Medicine, Epidemiology and Biostatistics. And our scholar panelists, Ahmad Zaid Abbasi, Applied Mathematics, UC Berkeley. Madeline Broom, Astronomy and Astrophysics, UC Santa Cruz. Arabi Seshapan, Physics, UC Merced. Tyler Singer-Clark, Biomedical Engineering, UC Davis.
Thank you all. This is very exciting. I want to thank first ARCS for having us here and all of you for being here. Just one small modification to the program. We have an additional distinguished scholar here, Hope Hopman from UC Merced, and she's going to tell us all about extremely interesting research and how she uses AI to advance it. So as you saw from the very informational video, my name is Simone Bianco. I am a principal investigator and director of computational biology at Altos Labs, which is a company that works on aging and preventing diseases related to aging. So in fact, I am 76 and look very young. No, it's not true. I'm 75. You spotted me. So, but my work, in my work, I use artificial intelligence to design therapies. I've done that for a number of years, and to especially try to understand mechanisms of how cells can resist to insult and disease. And I'm very excited about tonight's panel. As you all know, artificial intelligence is pervasive in our life. And it's in our phones, in our homes, in our cars, everywhere. And as much as it has been an advancement in our quality of life, there's so much more that needs to be done. And our scholars here are exceptional examples of the kind of applications that artificial intelligence can have for the future, for our future and the future of science. An important part of what you're going to hear tonight is also the work that our scholars are doing in advancing the algorithms, especially in being more fair, and the ethical implications of using artificial intelligence in our daily life. And so I want to thank you again all for being here. I'm going to give the microphone to my colleague, Tony Capra, who's going to be co-moderating with me.
Thank you. So it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you, everyone, for your support of these scholars and this program. My name is Tony Capra. I'm the head of the divisions of bioinformatics at UC San Francisco and director of the biological and medical informatics PhD program. So I see directly how the support you give helps support our students. And again, we're really so grateful for that. And I'm a computer scientist by training. I started my life in that world, but very quickly realized that rather than working on the latest search engine, I was really more passionate about trying to understand how the billions of A's, T's, C's, and G's that make up our genomes work, and how they make me, and you, and mean that some of us may be at increased risk for diseases. And 3 billion base pairs is a lot to look through, and so I realized that my training in computer science and artificial intelligence would be really useful for trying to solve those kinds of problems. And it's been 20 years, and I still love doing this. So I'm really excited here to be with you today. And to get things started, I'm just going to ask our panelists to take a moment to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they're excited about in terms of AI in their research or their research fields. So why don't we get started here?
Hi, I'm Tyler Singer-Clark. I'm a PhD student in the neuroprosthetics lab at UC Davis. And the goal of our lab, we work with clinical trial participants with paralysis, so people who can't move their hands or their mouth, and they actually have trouble or can't at all communicate. And our goal is to basically restore their ability to communicate, and we do so by recording their neural activity. So their brain activity still represents words they're trying to say, let's say, even if their muscles don't respond. And so AI basically enables this to happen. We actually wouldn't really be able to do what we're doing without AI. So, Tim?
Yeah, I think you're much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmad Abbasi. I'm a PhD student in my fourth year in the Applied Mathematics program at UC Berkeley. And my research involves theoretical and algorithmic water waves. It's sort of a hybrid between theory and high-performance computing, specifically numerical high-precision simulations to demonstrate or verify or refute conjectures. And while I don't use artificial intelligence in my research, my line of work in high-performance computing does have implications for artificial intelligence, specifically how AI and machine learning and deep learning algorithms are implemented. And I'm very excited about being able to contribute to this exploding field, I should call it. And while it's not clear exactly how right now, but I am sure that artificial intelligence does have implications for my field of work down the line. So I'm also very excited about that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Arabi. I go to UC Merced, and I am doing a PhD in physics. My field of research currently is material science, but I know we're going to talk more about material science later. So one of the things that I wanted to mention that I'm really excited about the use of AI for is in physics. Before I started at UC Merced, I was working at CERN for a little bit, and that's where the Higgs boson was discovered. That was a huge scientific discovery, right? The project that I was working on there wasn't even physics. I was working on storage solutions. So I was literally working on the hardware that makes sure it could collect all of the data, because once it's turned on, so much data is being collected. And honestly, I don't think there's enough human hours for people to be able to literally sift through all of the data. So who knows how many fundamental physics things we could already know from the data we already have, but we need something powerful to go through the data and find it. And I think AI is kind of one of those things that can come in and just look through large data sets and be able to tell us something cool could really be happening. We don't even know.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Houtman. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of California, Merced. And I've used machine learning in my research in two major ways. One, to predict groundwater contamination sites for a groundwater contaminant that's very, very costly to test for, and pretty much impossible to test for in developing countries where they wouldn't have access to refrigeration and so forth. So by using machine learning models by using data sets to train machine learning models to where we should look, we can find hotspots to narrow down the search for chemicals that taint drinking water, which is, of course, important for public health, cost, and the application of solutions. The other thing I've used machine learning for is with drones, to look for powdery mildew, which is a major problem in agriculture. And by training models, once again, with enough images, we can use drones to really target the use of pesticides. Again, benefits there are pretty obvious. So I'm really excited about the application of AI in agriculture.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm Madeline Broom. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz, and I'm an astronomer. So many of the applications of AI, or as you've also heard it called, machine learning, is very similar to what Arabi was talking about. These huge data sets coming down from brand new telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope, or the soon-to-be-launched Vera Rubin Telescope, or the Nancy Grace Roman Telescope. So these enormous data sets that human eyes can't possibly sift through can be helped by AI. But more interestingly, I think, I work on exoplanets, and you'll hear a little bit about that later, but galaxies galaxies like our own Milky Way, AI is enormously helpful in terms of image identification applications, just as we heard before. And so our human brains are excellent at looking at a picture of a galaxy and going, that's a galaxy, because we've been trained on these pictures of galaxies. We know what a galaxy looks like. And that's really what machine learning and AI is. We're training computers using math and code to think kind of like the human brain does, not in steps of 1, 2, 3, 4, but able to recognize patterns and sift out important information, making quick leaps to get there. And so I know AI can feel like a black box or a big scary buzzword, but I promise we're doing our best to implement it ethically, smartly, and to understand what's really going on underneath that black box hood.
So why don't, excellent, thank you all very much. So why don't we stay with you for a second, because you said something that was very interesting, which is that we're training AI to recognize patterns. So it is not only an accelerator, so it's not only augmenting our capabilities, but what is it doing for your field?
In particular for astronomy, I mentioned the image identification, so it helps us sort information coming in from telescopes without having to pay millions of grad students to do it for us. But it also has interesting implications for making computer models. We make these beautifully sophisticated computer models of our universe. These computer models are able to create entire galaxies that look almost exactly like what we see in real life. But in order to do that, they have to turn 1,000 different dials to get it to look exactly right. But one interesting application of AI has been to reduce that problem from turning 1,000 dials to turning just 2. So that not only tells us we can make these really sophisticated computer models that look just like real galaxies, just like real galaxy clusters. In fact, we can turn just 2 knobs, and those are the 2 most important physical factors in making these galaxies that look like our real universe.
That's very interesting.
And then building on this theme of what AI can enable, Tyler, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your research. In particular, you're trying to solve a really fundamental problem for individuals that can no longer speak or no longer move. Is it possible that AI could help them restore those capabilities?
Yeah. So our lab works with actually a single clinical trial participant right now. And so to actually sort of talk about 2 different maybe categories of AI. One is doing a very specific problem really, really well. So, for example, for this one man who's volunteered for our trial, we have an AI model that basically can translate his brain activity into what movements he's trying to make with his mouth. And that's not like very generalizable. It wouldn't work on someone else's brain activity right off the bat.
But would the process work on other people?
The process would work on other people. Yeah, but I guess a lot of those sort of like risks that people hear about with AI don't really apply to that in particular, because it's like, it's doing one thing. It's not necessarily generalizing to other people or consuming other people's like data, for example. It's just trying to help this guy, get what his thoughts out as words.
And so basically he cannot move his mouth, but he can still think about moving his mouth. And then the AI can translate that through the computer to help him speak.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Exceptional.
And just something I wanted to add to that is that that's sort of the first step, is going from his brain activity to what mouth movements he's trying to make. But then there's also trying to reconstruct from those mouth movements what words or what sentences he's actually trying to say. And that actually incorporates a sort of a second AI model now, that something maybe a lot of you have heard of, like ChatGPT. Yeah. You can maybe put in some sort of question and it'll give you a whole long answer. Similar to that, we'll put in like what mouth movements we think our participant's making, and it'll basically generate the most likely sentence that he's saying. But I think that sort of gets into a second category of AI, which is actually consuming a lot of data from a lot of different people, sentences all over, scraped from all over the internet. And now you get into a lot of the complexity of like, well, was that really the sentence he was trying to say? Is that actually the likely words that he was trying to say? And I think there's just sort of a lot of complexity that comes in with that second step that you don't necessarily have to work with in the first step.
So to follow up on that, it's very interesting. So I want to ask this question to you, but also to Ahmed, who has an education in ethics. And so at what stage of so you're talking about clinical trials. This is really the culmination of a years-long process that finally gets into the application to humans. So how do you think, when do you think AI should be applied, and what are the ethical implications of that? I know we're talking immediately about ethics. I promised to do it later, but, please.
Yeah, I think different domains and different types of medical devices probably have different answers for this. I think Ahmad can talk a little bit about stuff we've chatted about in the past about like maybe for like drug discovery and things like that. For our application, it's a little different. It's not like you can sort of validate this AI model, once and then for years down the line use the same model, because it's sort of you're training it separately per person. So you sort of have to validate, I guess, the technique. It's sort of this the process of doing it. But yeah, I guess it's like it's a different type of safety that we now have to think about, right? There's the medical device safety is something that we're implanting into your body. Are the materials safe? But now there's this whole new area of, is the software and the AI that we're using also safe?
Ahmad, would you like to comment? Please.
Yes, thank you. As someone with experience, professional experience, education and certification in clinical research, management, and ethics in scientific research, I should mention that this whole concept of clinical trials, as we've known them today, is what you might call human-centric. The human is at the center, namely the human test subjects and the human investigators and the whole staff that actually make clinical trials work. And it's undergone a very long and, I would say, tumultuous journey to get to where we are today, where we have this sort of understanding of the ethics of clinical research, from the Nuremberg Code to the Helsinki Declaration to the Belmont Report to all the way to the good clinical practice and ICH as we understand it today. I think now it's V2 from 2013. And we've gone through some very horrific periods, like experiments on humans during the Holocaust and the Tuskegee syphilis study. So we really have to understand that this whole understanding of where ethics are at is very human-centric, as well as the classic design of clinical trials, the sort of classic double-blind, randomized, four-phase clinical trial system for drugs has the human in mind. And the only question is, how do we incorporate AI into this thing where humans and AI don't necessarily compete against one another, but rather complement and supplement each other? So it's not as if it's black and white where, humans are going to be replaced altogether and we won't need clinical trials, or AI is just for raw computing power to come up with the good molecule and save us 10 years. No, that's not it. What seems should be the case is that we should look at these ethics as well as the design of our clinical trials, where humans and AI kind of go in tandem, hand in hand, right from the beginning. And that might necessarily implicate a radical change in how we design our experiments. So from going up an order of magnitude in the number of participants and radically changing the profile of the participants from one stage to the next, I think, in my understanding, and I'm not a life scientist by training, but it seems to me that it should be a bit more homogenized, where AI can sort of complement humans so that the jump or the discrepancy in the profile and number of participants from one stage to the next is not so drastic. And at the same time, reformulating the ethics in terms of safety and efficacy, even as far as quality and animal testing, that's going to be a mighty big challenge, since AI is this exploding field that's, as hard as it is to believe, is still in its infancy.
There are a number of themes, I think, there in your answer that are, I think, infusing a lot of the discussion that's going around the application of AI in many fields. And, Hope, we were talking earlier about how your work interacts and intersects with often policy decisions where the AI may be making certain recommendations. And so that's, I think, getting in a more immediate way to how the predictions are interacting with our human systems for making decisions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the chemical that I'm studying has some pretty serious public health implications. And of course, the EPA has regulated similar chemicals, and some of the research that I do could be used to gather information from areas where there is a dearth of knowledge that might go into influencing the formation of a national policy. Right now, for many chemicals, there's only state and local policies, and therefore state and local funding to clean up some of the chemicals that have inadvertently entered our water supply and also taint soil. But I think through using machine learning models and models that are trained on data, and of course with ground truthing it with actual information, that's much more expensive to gather, then it can be used to understand just how great problems are, where policy needs to be applied, whether it be a national or state level, and just provide some of that guidance for the formation of new policy, especially when it comes to our environment and drinking water supply.
And what are the limits there? So once you give a recommendation, who's setting boundaries around what the recommendation is from the AI? Is it you? Is it the policymaker? Who?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's both. And of course, like I was mentioning, like ground truthing, of course, needs to happen. But I think it can be used to identify hotspots. The problem with our agricultural models that I've been involved with so far is that they're very region specific. So new models have to be developed depending on what the aquifer looks like, what the geology looks like in a particular area. And training models with machine learning can be pretty computationally expensive and take quite a bit of time. So that's one of the limitations that we face with our research.
Yeah.
Can you take a model that's developed for grapevines in Merced and transfer it to the Napa Valley or to France or to an area that also has powdery mildew, for example, or groundwater contamination, and will it work? So it takes quite a bit of time to know how well those models work.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So I would be interested in transitioning our perspective to thinking about how and whether AI can generate new knowledge or perhaps new materials. I wonder if you would sort of comment on the potential for that in your field.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, actually. So if you'd like to come to my poster, I'd love to tell you about some of the work I'm doing. I'm actually not working on AI models myself, but the project that I'm discussing in my poster downstairs is a materials discovery project. Basically, a lab came to us because they made a material first, and then they asked us, okay, now what do we do with it? And the reason that they have to do that is because making stuff in the lab is expensive and hard and takes years to be able to do. So sometimes they kind of just make what they can make and then figure out what it's good for later. But there's papers have come out. There's actually this autonomous lab that was created, and what they were able to do was they just set it up. They had this AI come up with hundreds of new possible materials, and then they just let it autonomously work. And within 17 days, it synthesized 56 new model materials.
So what does it mean come up? What is it learning that uses? Is it learning from other materials, from building blocks? What is it learning?
Yes, there are lots of databases out there of materials that already exist. And materials means sort of a lot of things, but it means like different orientations of different molecules and different lattices, but it also means different defects in those materials. Like what if you have, for my poster, what if you have a sheet of WS2 and you put a single cobalt atom? That's its own new material. It has its own new properties compared to the one without the cobalt in it. And suddenly my material could be a potential qubit, which it didn't have that ability before. So these are literally just putting in one variable for another. But how many human hours would it have taken for people to come up with all of the options? This autonomous lab came up with 56 new materials in 17 days.
Just a comment. Isn't it great to hear somebody say, my material? I don't think I've ever. The enthusiasm that I see in these scholars is infectious, really infectious. So going back, you were saying something that to me is fascinating. We're going to go from the infinitesimally small, if you allow, to the incredibly large and far away. So tell us about exoplanets. What are they? How do we get there? Is there any life? Can AI help us figure out if that's true or not? Or
I sure hope so. So exoplanets are planets around other stars in our galaxy. Our Milky Way is made up of about 100 million stars, and around each of those stars there should be an average of 4 planets. Now, some should have 0, and some should have maybe 9 or 8, like our own solar system does. But the way we look for these planets is by looking for the tiny dip in brightness from the star as the planet passes in front of it. And that's something that AI is incredibly well equipped to do. We currently have 5,000 confirmed exoplanets, and confirmed is very important because we've possibly discovered many more than that. But what it requires is scientists to look painstakingly at each of these tiny little dips in brightness in the front of the star in order to confirm that, yep, that's definitely an exoplanet. So it's something that AI, with all of its manpowers and training on models, is really well equipped to do. As for detecting life, it actually may be helpful in determining whether there's life on Mars. Now, there's currently a sample return mission on Mars that has not funded right now, so we'll just have the analysis that the instruments on the Martian rover can do in situ, that they can do on the planet's surface. And so using AI may be one way that we can determine whether or not there are, in fact, tiny microbes or other biosignatures, signs of life on the Martian surface.
So we hear one last question before we open to the public focus. I'm very curious about this. We always hear the fact that these models, these AI models, are incredibly expensive to run, incredibly expensive to, well, maybe not to run, but to train. How do they run on a machine that is, on another planet?
So wonderfully, Mars is close enough to home that it's able to send us back the data. So we didn't equip the Martian rover with the ability to think in AI. I wish we did. But it's sending us the data back, and we're able to analyze that using AI.
So there's no ChatGPT on Mars.
Oh, goodness. Can you imagine the Curiosity rover would tell us? It'd be so heartbreaking as she died there.
Well, I would really love to keep asking questions, but I also want to make sure that you all have a chance. So is there anything you'd like to ask our panel? Please just raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone around. Oh, actually, no. We have one.
Yeah, we're one in the back there.
Yeah.
So this has been a fascinating discussion about how to use AI in scientific research, and you guys have done a great job of explaining how each of you has used AI or is thinking about using AI in your research. The classic way of doing research, or at least the traditional way of describing research, is coming up with a hypothesis and then using it, maybe a test to probe that hypothesis. But I think that we all know that sometimes research doesn't go that way, that research is oftentimes just kind of triggered by a surprise. And I was wondering if you guys could talk about whether you think that AI, either the panelists or the two moderators, could be used to identify the surprises. Like, could classifying galaxies is certainly great, but if you could find a galaxy that doesn't conform to expectation, that might be more informative than all the thousands and thousands of galaxies that you could classify easily, but maybe a talented undergrad could as well.
I have to say thank you to Jeremy, because this was number one on our list of backup questions.
Yes.
So thank you from me for asking that. I don't know, does anyone want to take it?
I can start. So you mentioned there's hypothesis driven. You have this particular thing that you want to test. And then there's also sort of the other side of maybe more exploratory, where you didn't necessarily know what you were looking for. And a lot of times papers are maybe actually the second one, but they're written like the first one, as if, oh, you know what, I hypothesized this. And it's well, maybe not. But I think maybe AI, as others have talked about, just the sheer scale of things that we can do now, explore a lot more materials, or let computers figure out how molecules are going to fold instead of having humans, explicitly test these things. Maybe we can lean more into the second, be less hypothesis driven, and it just enables us to optimize for that second type that is more just sort of exploratory, see what happens, just because we have the scale to explore 1,000 things instead of 10.
Tyler, can I ask a follow-up question on that, specifically in terms of your research? I don't think we understand fully how our brains specify the way our lips or our mouths or our hands move. And yet it sounds like you've been able to use AI without knowing specifically the hypothesis underlying exactly how the specific neurons in our brain accomplish those functions. Because you knew what you wanted to accomplish and what you wanted to make the machine do, it actually was able to learn some part of that that was useful. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Like basically we have a big, I'll just call it an AI model that's, mapping our participants' neural activity to the movements he's trying to make. I would say that took a lot of the burden off of us. Basically, like we didn't have necessarily a hypothesis of what's the really complicated model that goes from, let's say, 200 different neurons spiking at different speeds. And then this one means the tongue goes up and then this one means the lips close. Like we don't, have a hypothesis for what exactly the right, combination or model that is. And we just let the AI do it. So I think it takes the burden off of us from that perspective.
Or maybe just a different burden.
Yeah. But at the same time, it also makes it now sometimes harder to look under the hood and be like, oh, let's actually now study. What if we did want to know which neurons are talking about the tongue moving up and the lips closing or something like that? I wouldn't necessarily say it's harder, but maybe it comes second. It's like you do the AI version and then you can work backwards now and try and figure out, oh, what did this model figure out about how the brain actually works? Let's try and figure that out.
Do we have more questions?
Yes, please.
To you?
I know you're not except one person in the medical field, but I'd love to know how AI is being used in cancer research.
I can take that a little bit. So, the amazing thing about cancer is we say cancer as if that's one thing, but actually cancer is really kind of true to its name, a constellation of different diseases, each one unique because it arises from mutations that happen inside your body where your normal cells, something goes wrong that causes them to stop listening to the other cells in your body and grow without end. And so at least from the fields that I work in, which are related to understanding DNA and how genetic factors relate to, events like that lead to disease, AI is critically important because, as I was mentioning earlier, our genomes are very, very large. And the possible set of genetic variants or changes to the genome that could lead to cancer is far too big for us to ever search for individually. And to then figure out how those specific changes might relate to whether one drug will work or another drug will work are actually really well suited to artificial intelligence. So that's just one example of trying to identify how this thing that we think of as a big constellation of different diseases actually can be understood and mapped, and targeted treatments can be provided for people that need them. I don't know if anyone else has.
Any other question from the audience? Yes, please.
Matt. Thank you. I was wondering, obviously there's a lot of different fields using AI, machine learning. How can one in the public, not necessarily in academia, get started in trying to think about how we could use AI? Or do we need to be connected with other resources, such as people that already have degrees in AI, but all I see these days are subscription services and either free or, you pay a good amount of money to make images, videos, music. But I'm in nursing. How do I get to the next level? How can I say, oh, maybe I can use AI for cancer research, for anything of the sort?
That's a fantastic question. Anyone who wants to take it?
Can I follow up on that? Are you asking how you can get into working in AI, or how you can use it?
Is there a bundle AI for dummies?
No, so the reason I'm clarifying is because I actually think that AI is kind of one of these things that it's really suited for someone from the public to pick up, because there are sort of, I think, tech in general, I feel like it's really easy to go on Udemy or Coursera and then be able to pick up a Python for learning how to code for the first time. But then also there's so many, I have a classmate who just participated in this sort of AI hackathon that was just to the public, where they basically just uploaded a bunch of, I think it was even telescope data, and they were just there is just so much data, we don't know what to do with it. Everyone have access to this data. Everyone learned how to use some of these basic Python AI packages, and then just go for it and see if you can come up with something and tell us what cool information you find from it. And I think especially software types of things are things that anyone from the public should be able to find access to resources.
That's a great point, but let me follow up with a but.
Okay.
Which is that we are hearing more and more that only large companies like with deep pockets or funded by other companies with deep pockets like OpenAI, funded by Microsoft or Google, Meta, they are the only ones who can train the large models and then power some of our devices, right? And so is there now a disconnect between what research, for example, in public universities or in universities can do, and the kind of the kind of AI, the kind of machine learning, the kind of models that can be trained for these general purpose uses?
I'll take that.
Yes.
I'd say the answer is yes, and there's downsides to that, but there's also enormous benefit to that. So the kind of models that are running our computers, our phones, that are running ChatGPT are specified for doing what they're good at. I'd like to tell you the story of how my friend lost Google $100 billion. So Google released a ChatGPT equivalent. It was their newest generative assistant, and it made a post. And this post said, "This is the picture of the first ever exoplanet." And it was a picture of my friend's planet, which is not nearly the first exoplanet discovered. That was back in 1995. And in doing so, the Google stock took a $100 billion dump.
Wow.
And so that model was not specifically trained to identify astronomical data.
Yes.
And the one we do to identify astronomical data is very, very specific and very closely monitored. So I would say, yes, we are losing access to enormous computing power that comes out of these big companies, but it also allows us to have hands-on and very closely monitor the models we make and use.
That's an excellent consideration. I would have so many follow-up, but we have maybe time for one last question before we wrap up. We have 10 minutes. Oh, more than one question.
Definitely.
Yeah, please.
It's a great discussion. So I don't know if this is as much of an issue for you scientists, but we often hear that these AI models, they're basically processing information. And so we're assuming at some level the integrity of the data, right?
Yes.
So I guess I'd be interested in you guys addressing that issue. Is that a big issue in your fields? How do we assure the integrity of the data so that the models then produce results that hopefully are reliable?
Does anybody want to take that?
I have a really funny story related to that I want to add before someone has a real answer.
Did anyone lose $100 billion?
No, but I was crowdsourcing information from friends before joining this panel, and I was asking, do you have any terror stories? And a friend said the Tesla self-driving is trained on user data. So actually at a yellow light, the cars will slow down and then speed up. So that's a good question. No, that was a great question. I'd love to hear if someone has a good answer about training on good data.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's like, to some degree, AI can just amplify what people already do and just do it to a further extent. So in my particular use case, trying to come up with words on someone's behalf, it's like I mentioned the two-step process. The first step is from neural data to movements, and the second step is from those movements or parts of words into what sentence they're trying to say. I would love for there to be a lot less of that second step and a lot more of that first step. So basically, if the first step could go straight from neural data to really precisely what movements they were making, you wouldn't have to rely on the large language model, that part at the end that is trained on the internet, for example, and would do things like the text equivalent of speeding up at a yellow light, and maybe say something that person wouldn't want to say, right? So I think there's it's sort of unique to each use case, but in this case, it would be less dependence on a large language model trained on the whole internet and more dependence on one person's neural activity, for example. So there's all sorts of levers you can pull, I think, to address that, but it's a major problem you're bringing up.
Yes. Microphone right there.
As I understand it, the person who has the neural implant that you're speaking of can communicate with his family in intelligible ways. So his brainwaves have been translated by an artificial intelligence into sentences that mean something. And then he gives you feedback about whether that's the right sentence somehow, or his family gives you feedback, or what.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem because there's sort of a chicken and egg problem, right? Of like, if he has so much trouble communicating and then he says a sentence, he doesn't necessarily have another method of giving like the ground truth of what exactly he was trying to say. He does have the ability to move his eyes, so he can at least choose between, like he can move his eyes left to say that sentence was actually incorrect. It wasn't what I was trying to say. Or he can move his eyes right to say that was correct. So there is some degree of it has to be good enough to at least get close. So he has some sentences he can say, yes, that was correct. And then the AI will continue to improve. Because if they were always incorrect, it actually would just... Yeah. He's getting better at using it. The AI model is getting better at providing him the service. Yeah.
Right? We got one more question here.
So recording. I'm embarrassed to say this is probably the least impressive question that will be asked all night long. But what kind of energy is it taking to do all this work? I mean, you hear about solar farms taking up thousands of acres. I don't know. Just what's the energy demand from all of this?
Who wants to take this? Does anyone know?
And should we worry about it?
I can say something really quick.
Yes.
I know with our particular models that we're using, I'll stay in my lane and I'll make this short, but for agriculture, we try to use the smallest amount of data that we can. And the computationally expensive part, the part that requires a lot of processing speed and so forth, is the training of the model. Once it's trained, it doesn't take up that much, it doesn't require that much energy in terms of computational energy, if that makes sense. And the other thing is we try to train our models on the smallest amount of data possible so that they're not overfit and they're more generalizable. I could say that.
And in context, the sort of scientific applications you're hearing about here are just a tiny drop
fraction. Yes.
Compared to what the Microsofts and Googles and Facebooks are doing on your data that you happen to give as you are using them every day. So yes, I think you do need to be worried about this globally, but the scientific applications are sadly much smaller than some of those others. Yeah.
All right, we need to wrap up. And do we have one last one? One quick one? Jeremy, you have one?
Are we?
Very quick one.
Okay.
So we've had a kind of a highly cerebral discussion thus far. So I'll just reflect personally that some of my interactions with AI have been, I don't know, frankly, a little creepy. And so I was wondering, amongst just getting out of your head and more towards your heart, for people who interact with AI more familiarly than I do, does it remain creepy, or does it become more like a buddy?
Probably worked.
Hey.
Well, my answer's quick. I think it's less creepy for me. I know what you mean. I feel that way too. But no, I see it as more like a practical tool, like a something that allows you to accomplish something with data that you really couldn't otherwise. But I do worry about sort of like the loss of tangible connection with the land in terms of agriculture. If we're just depending on a machine to tell us this plant's diseased, this plant needs more water, then I worry about that knowledge that gets lost, that gets passed down from generation to generation. That's my concern there.
Yeah. So, all right, I think we've got to give somebody a watch here. So with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for attending, and thank especially our panelists. I hope you see the great potential that you're enabling in their research. So thank you again.
Yeah, and please, I'm sure they will be very happy to answer any other question you might have for them. So please do come up once this is done. Thank you all. Oh, please.
Don't go. Thank you, moderators and panelists. That was fabulous. But we have one more thing to do tonight before I'm going to let you go. We have to, a lot of people talk to a lot of scholars, which was great. And we have a prize for somebody. Thank you all for coming and for all your generosity to helping all of our scholars accomplish so many fabulous things. Okay, we're going to do this really fast. One last thing. Okay. Okay, enough. Okay. I've got to open it. Okay. All right. And I love doing this. And the prize goes to, I can't read it, Elizabeth Adams. And if you're not here, oh, okay, all right. All right. Congratulations. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. We hope you had a great time, and we'll see you next year.